Hey, what's going on, everybody? It's the CD guy, Johnny Z here. Thank you so much for tuning back into the channel, and today is time for the 400 subscriber special, and it's also Talking Albums number 57, and today I'm going to be counting down my top 15 favorite rock and metal albums of all time. This is a video that I've been looking forward to making for a very long time, and, just a disclaimer here off the top. These are a list of albums that are my personal favorites. I'm not claiming that these are the greatest albums of all time, but rather my personal favorites, the albums in my collection that I gravitate towards the most. So that being said, let's get into the list here with my number 15. To kick things off, I'm going to go with Brutal Planet by Alice Cooper. And, this is one of my favorite Alice Cooper albums of all time. And this is really one of my favorite eras of Alice Cooper. Outside of the original Alice Cooper group is Alice Cooper trying his hand with industrial here. And he would release a second industrial album in Dragontown a couple years later. But in my opinion, it just doesn't hit the same as Brutal Planet does here. Just an incredible album, so heavy. And you look at Cooper on the back here, it doesn't even look like the same guy, A really, really unique album here from Alice Cooper, something that's totally different from the rest of the Cooper catalog, in my opinion, and the track listing on here, just every track on here is so heavy, Brutal Planet, great way to kick things off. Wicked Young Man is an amazing deep cut. Sanctuary, Blow Me a Kiss, Eat Some More, Pick Up the Bones, Pessimistic, Gimme, The Little Things, Take It Like a Woman, and Cold Machines, the very much Marilyn Manson-influenced Cold Machines to close things out. This album is just stacked from top to bottom with amazing heavy tracks, and in my opinion, it's one of Cooper's best, so I can think of no better way to kick off the list here of my favorite albums of all time than with my number 15, Brutal Planet by Alice Cooper. Coming in at number 14, I'm going to go with Injustice for All by Metallica from 1988, and this is Metallica's sound moving in a lot more of a progressive direction. The songs were getting a lot more intricate and getting longer as well. And that was the natural evolution of Metallica's sound for a number of years, was the band moving in that more progressive direction with their music. And that's really cool to me. This is such a heavy album as well, and just another one of those albums that's absolutely stacked. Blackened and Justice for All, Eye of the Beholder, One, The Shortest Straw, Harvester of Sorrow, though overplayed, is a great song as well. The Frayed Ends of Sanity, To Live Is to Die, and Dyer's Eve to close things out. To Live Is to Die is an incredible instrumental track as well, and 1988 is one of my favorite periods for Metallica. Really, like 1988 through 1989 on that Justice for All tour is just a tremendous era of the band for Metallica, in my opinion, and I love this album to death. You guys can't see, but to the left of me, I have a giant Injustice for All banner here hanging on my wall. Just great stuff, and like I said, one of my favorite Metallica albums of all time. Number 14 here on the list, 1988's Injustice for All. Following that up with number 13, I'm going to go with The Wall by Pink Floyd, and, when it comes to The Wall, this is my introduction to Pink Floyd, I was aware of, their radio hits and things like that, but I really didn't pursue Pink Floyd as one of the bands that I was into until I picked up The Wall, and I listened to it from top to bottom, and, I love a good concept album, and that's really what drew me into this album here, and it's a fantastic concept. It's so intricate, and, it's really Roger Waters' masterpiece, in my opinion. Just great material on this album, a really cool concept, incredible instrumentation, as always, from Pink Floyd, and, what surprised me is that there's a lot of Pink Floyd fans that will either take or leave this album. You either love this album or you hate it. And in my opinion, I love this album to death. I know a lot of people think it's overrated and it's a bit overplayed, but for me personally, it's one of my favorite albums of all time, with tracks on here like In the Flesh and Another Brick in the Wall Part 1, Another Brick in the Wall Part 2. Really, all three parts of Another Brick in the Wall are really integral to the story, and great tracks as well. Mother, Goodbye Blue Sky, Young Lust, Goodbye Cruel World, Hey You is fantastic, Comfortably Numb as well. In the Flesh again, the reprising of In the Flesh is really cool. Let's see here. Waiting for the Worms, Outside the Wall, just really cool tracks that are super important to the story overall. So for that reason, it's my number 13 here on the list. One of my all-time favorite concept albums. Gotta go with the legendary The Wall by Pink Floyd. For my number 12, how about a little bit of AC/DC here on the list? How about Highway to Hell, the final AC/DC album with Bon Scott on vocals before he would unfortunately pass away in early 1980, and after that, AC/DC would replace him with Brian Johnson, and they would move on to bigger things with Back in Black, which I'll get to in a little bit, but this is the final album here with Bon Scott on vocals, and in my opinion, this is Bon Scott's peak when it comes to lyrics and vocals as well. Bon Scott, one of my all-time favorite classic rock vocalists, and he does just an incredible job here on this album. Tracks on here like Highway to Hell. Highway to Hell, one of the greatest classic rock songs of all time, a radio staple, a live staple as well for the band. Girls Got Rhythm is probably my favorite AC/DC deep cut from the Bon Scott era. Just awesome stuff there. Walk All Over You, Touch Too Much, Beating Around the Bush, Shut Down in Flames, If You Want Blood, You Got It, Love Hungry Man, and Night Prowler to close things out. Night Prowler, one of the heaviest songs in the AC/DC catalog. Super bluesy stuff as well on that track, which makes it one of my favorite album closers of all time. Just fantastic stuff there by AC/DC. And all in all, this album is one of my favorites from the AC/DC catalog. I think it's definitely the best with Bon on vocals. And, you know, I love Brian Johnson, but in my opinion, I've always been a bit more of a Bon Scott guy to the Brian Johnson era. Even though they're both fantastic, I just prefer the Bon Scott era a little bit more. And I really love this album to death here. I think the band sounds fantastic. Angus Young has some incredible solos on here as well. Awesome riffs written on this album by the band. And in addition to this being one of the best albums of all time, it also has one of the best album covers of all time as well. Sometimes simplicity is key, and this is such a cool album cover. Great way to get you hooked in for the album, and once you start listening, it's one of the best albums of all time. My number 12 here on the list. Gotta go with Highway to Hell by AC/DC, the final album with Bon Scott on vocals. Alice in Chains are one of my favorite bands of all time, and their 1992 breakout album, Dirt, makes my list here at number 11. Just a legendary album here, one of the best from the grunge period, from that Seattle sound, and in my opinion, it's the greatest grunge album of all time, actually. I love this album so much, with tracks on here like Them Bones, Damn That River, Rain When I Die, Down in a Hole, Sick Man, Rooster, Junkhead, Dirt, Godsmack, Hate to Feel, Angry Chair, and Wood. Just top to bottom, it is a legendary album, and Lane Staley on vocals just sounds incredible here. In his prime, Lane was one of the greatest vocalists of all time, in my opinion. Also, you got great riffs on here from Jerry Cantrell, and awesome lyrics as well, written by Lane and Jerry. Just really, really cool stuff. In addition to the awesome vocal harmonies on here from Lane and Jerry as well. One of the things that Alice in Chains do better than anybody else. There's incredible stuff here on this album, and like I said, this is the greatest grunge album of all time in my opinion. Definitely the best to come out of that Seattle sound from 1992. My number 11 here on the list is Dirt by Alice in Chains. Moving on now into the top 10, my number 10 here on the list is, in my opinion, the heaviest Judas Priest album in their catalog, and that is Painkiller here from 1990. And, you know, after a string of a couple lackluster albums in the Priest catalog, in Turbo and Ram It Down, which they're not bad albums by any means, but, you know, not up to par with the stuff that Priest was doing beforehand, Priest came raging back here with Painkiller. Like I said, it's the heaviest album in their catalog, in my opinion. And this era, the Painkiller era of the band, is, in my opinion, the peak of Rob Halford's vocals. I don't think he ever sounded better than on Painkiller and the subsequent tour. Just awesome, awesome stuff from a vocal perspective. And speaking of Rob Halford, this would be the last Judas Priest album Rob Halford would perform vocals on until Angel of Retribution from 2005. So really cool there. And like I said, this album is so heavy, with tracks on here like Painkiller, the title track, one of the greatest title tracks of all time. Hell Patrol as well. All Guns Blazing has got a great vocal performance by Halford. Let's see here. Leather Rebel, Metal Meltdown, Nightcrawler, Between the Hammer and the Anvil is just an incredible deep cut that nobody talks about, and it's an incredible song. Touch of Evil, one of my favorite Priest songs of all time. One Shot at Glory as well to close things out. From top to bottom, this album is loaded with incredible material and awesome guitar work by the band as well. Glenn Tipton and KK Downing sound fantastic on this album, and great drumming on this album as well. Just awesome, awesome stuff. The whole band sounds fantastic, so cracking the top 10 here. My number 10 is Painkiller by Judas Priest from 1990. Next at number 9, I'm going to go with Powerslave by Iron Maiden from 1985, and this is regarded by many as the greatest Iron Maiden album of all time. And, you know, for me personally, there are a couple more albums that I prefer to Powerslave, which, spoiler alert, will be featured on this list as we get closer to the number 1 spot, but this is an incredible album. It's Maiden in their prime here, right? In prime Iron Maiden, we're pretty untouchable. Maiden are my favorite band of all time. I love tracks on here like Aces High, 2 Minutes to Midnight, Flesh of the Blade, Back in the Village, Powerslave, and Rime of the Ancient Mariner. And a lot of the tracks off this album would become live staples as well, and for good reason. You know, these tracks on here are some of Maiden's best. Aces High is a great way to open up the album, and one of the best concert openers of all time is Aces High, right? 2 Minutes to Midnight as well. Having seen Maiden live a number of times, the crowd goes absolutely nuts for 2 Minutes to Midnight, which is really awesome to hear. Powerslave, great title track, even better live, right? Just an incredible riff to it. Great bass riffs on this entire album by Steve Harris as well. And then, of course, Rime of the Ancient Mariner. Really influential for its time, really innovative, because a lot of bands were not putting out 13-minute classics, but Maiden did here with Rime of the Ancient Mariner. Just an incredible 13-minute epic to close out the album, and in my opinion, it's one of Maiden's best, but there will be a couple more Iron Maiden albums featured on this list as we get closer to the number 1 spot, like I said. So coming in at number 9 here today, gotta go with Powerslave by Iron Maiden. Well, we talked about The Wall a little bit earlier and how I love a good concept album, and that being said, coming in at number 8 here, I'm going to go with Operation Mindcrime by Queensryche. The peak of Queensryche creativity, in my opinion, and a fantastic concept here. I love a good concept album, like I said, and this is one of the best, with tracks on here like I Remember Now, To Anarchy X, To Revolution Calling, Operation Mindcrime, Speak, Spreading the Disease, The Mission, Sweet Sister Mary, The Needle Lies, Electric Requiem, Breaking the Silence, I Don't Believe in Love, Eyes of a Stranger. The concept is so well put together and just a really, really interesting story being played out with all these tracks here. Just awesome, awesome stuff. And musically, great tracks on here like Revolution Calling and Speak, Operation Mindcrime. I Don't Believe in Love. Sweet Sister Mary is a 10-minute epic sandwiched in the middle of the album. Breaking the Silence, Eyes of a Stranger as well. There's awesome, awesome tracks on here. Eyes of a Stranger, one of my favorite Queensryche tracks of all time, as well as I Don't Believe in Love and Sweet Sister Mary. Just awesome, awesome stuff. And got Jeff Tate on vocals. He sounds fantastic throughout this entire album. This is just incredible, incredible stuff here. Like I said, it's the peak of Queensryche's creativity here with 1988's Operation Mindcrime. Awesome, awesome stuff. My number 8 here on the list. For my number 7, I'm going to go with Killing Machine or Hellbent for Leather by Judas Priest, whatever you want to call it. And this is my favorite Priest album of all time. When Priest were in their prime, they had peak instrumentation, incredible vocals by Rob Halford as well. They were pretty unmatched in those departments, which makes for incredible music. And like I said, this is my favorite Priest album of all time with tracks on here like Delivering the Goods, Rock Forever, Evening Star, Hellbent for Leather, Take on the World. The Green Man Alicia with the two-pronged crown is an incredible cover. Let's see what else is on here. Killing Machine. Before the Dawn as well. Just awesome, awesome material on here from top to bottom, and this is one of the greatest new wave of British heavy metal albums of all time. You can see the band on the back there. Judas Priest, like I said, in their prime, were pretty untouchable. So that being said, my number 7 here on the list is Hellbent for Leather, or Killing Machine, whichever you want to call it, by Judas Priest. Well, I mentioned before that we would get to Back in Black by AC/DC, so my number 6 here on the list is Back in Black, and, AC/DC was really my introduction to heavier music. It started with AC/DC, and that provided a gateway to Iron Maiden, to Metallica, to Black Sabbath, and, so on and so forth, until we got here, where I'm just buying pretty much everything at this point. But AC/DC is where I all got it started here for me, and Back in Black was the first AC/DC album that I ever heard. It's one of the greatest classic rock albums of all time, the first with Brian Johnson on vocals, replacing Bon Scott, who passed away earlier in the year, and with tracks on here like Hell's Bells, Shoot to Thrill, What Do You Do for Money, Honey, Giving the Dog a Bone, Back in Black, You Shook Me All Night Long, Have a Drink on Me, Shake a Leg, and Rock and Roll Ain't Noise Pollution. It's not hard to believe why. This is one of the greatest classic rock albums of all time, and a great place to start if you're looking to get into AC/DC, which is exactly where I started, and one of my favorite albums of all time. Like I said, it's where it all started for me. Gotta go with Back in Black here at number 6. A super important album for me because it was my introduction to AC/DC, which through AC/DC was pretty much my introduction to everything else in the world of rock and metal. We break into the top 5 now with Iron Maiden, with Seventh Son of a Seventh Son from 1988. Another great concept album here on the list, and like I said before, Iron Maiden would be featured on the list a couple more times, and here's another one of the entries from the Iron Maiden camp here with Seventh Son. It's a really, really cool concept, and in my opinion, the last great Iron Maiden album until Brave New World in 2000, right? Tracks on here like Moonchild, Infinite Dreams, Can I Play With Madness is a fine song, it's overplayed a bit, but tracks on here like The Evil That Men Do, Seventh Son of a Seventh Son, The Prophecy, The Clairvoyant, and the super underrated Only the Good Die Young to close things out are awesome. Just from top to bottom, this album is really, really cool, loaded with tremendous Maiden tracks on here, and one of my favorite albums of all time, definitely one of my favorite concept albums ever written. Just incredible stuff here by Maiden, who were absolutely in their prime with that legendary string of albums from Number of the Beast to Seventh Son of a Seventh Son. Maiden were absolutely untouchable here and cementing themselves as one of the greatest metal bands of all time during this period. And I do think Seventh Son of a Seventh Son does have a lot to do with that. Just an awesome album, one of Maiden's best, and my number 5 here on the list, kicking us off in the top 5 with Seventh Son of a Seventh Son by Iron Maiden. Well, if Iron Maiden are my favorite band of all time, then Metallica is my second favorite band of all time. And for my number 4, I'm going to go with Ride the Lightning here by Metallica, their sophomore album, and one of the greatest sophomore albums of all time here by Metallica. Some of my favorite tracks include Fight Fire with Fire, Ride the Lightning, Room the Bell Tolls, one of my all-time favorite Metallica songs, really one of my favorite songs, period, right? Let's see here. Fade to Black, which is very different for Metallica at the time. Metallica faced a little bit of backlash at the time because Fade to Black was a lot more ballad heavy than a lot of their other tracks, but in my opinion, it's a fantastic song. It will become a live staple and one of Metallica's most famous songs. Let's see. Trapped Under Ice, awesome deep cut. Escape is great as well, even though the band hates it. I think it's a great song. Creeping Death will become a live staple. So much better with Jason Newsted in the band when they perform it live. Just really, really awesome. I swear that song possessed Jason Newsted. Well, it was just really, really great when Newsted would perform it with them live. But the album version is incredible as well. And then you have Call of Cthulhu. Great instrumental to close things out. And in my opinion, Cthulhu is a better instrumental than Orion. Maybe that's my unpopular Metallica opinion, but I just prefer Cthulhu to Orion. Awesome stuff here from top to bottom on this album. My favorite Metallica album of all time, and like I said, one of the best sophomore albums ever released. Gotta go with Ride the Lightning by Metallica for my number 4 here on the list. Top 3 now. For my number 3, I'm going to go with a bit of a polarizing one. But for my favorite band, Iron Maiden, I'm going to go with my favorite Maiden album, and that is Matter of Life and Death by Maiden here from 2006. And this is an album that when it was released, Maiden toured it live in its entirety. And, they played the whole album live from beginning to end, and that's something that the fans really didn't receive too well. It was not very well received in a live setting, but in my opinion, I would have absolutely loved to have heard this album from beginning to end live. I think that would have been absolutely awesome because, like I said, this is my favorite Maiden album of all time. I think Maiden here, with their heaviest album here, both lyrically and musically, got awesome riffs on here as well, like on tracks like Brighter Than a Thousand Suns and the reincarnation of Benjamin Brigg. Just awesome riffing on there by the band, and of course Bruce Dickinson on vocals, my favorite metal vocalist of all time, who sounds incredible as always. And really from beginning to end, I love this album to death, with tracks on here like Different World, These Colors Don't Run, Brighter Than a Thousand Suns, my favorite Maiden song of all time. It changes a lot, but Brighter Than a Thousand Suns is incredible. Let's see here. The Pilgrim, The Longest Day, Out of the Shadows, The Reincarnation of Benjamin Brigg, For the Greater Good of God. Awesome to hear them performing that song live on the recent Legacy of the Beast tour. Let's see, Lord of Light, The Legacy as well, produced by Kevin Shirley. This is my favorite Maiden album of all time, and I think it's criminally underrated in my opinion. Doesn't deserve the hate that it got when it first came out and was performed live by a lot of Maiden fans who wanted to hear classics in a live setting, but an album that I think has grown on a lot of people over time, and one of those Maiden albums that does have a niche following, and in my opinion, it's Maiden's best work, so it comes in at number 3 here on the list. My favorite Iron Maiden album of all time, gotta be A Matter of Life and Death, number 3 here on the list. My 1 and 2 are extremely close together, but if I were to pick a 1 and a 2, coming in at number 2 here on the list, I'm going to go with Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band by the Beatles, and I've told this story before on the channel, but, I used to be vaguely familiar with the Beatles radio hits, right? I mean, I enjoyed when the Beatles would come on the radio, but I really wasn't too familiar with their catalog until I went to a thrift store, and I picked up Sgt. Pepper, and I figured, what the heck, I like the radio hits, I'll buy it, I'll listen to it, and so I bought it, I listened to it, and it absolutely changed the way I enjoyed music. From here on out, I was a massive Beatles fan, and this album really turned me on to a lot of other great albums and bands from the 60s and 70s, and Sgt. Pepper's is a masterpiece in my opinion from top to bottom here. Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, the title track is great, and the reprise as well, really, really cool. With a little help from my friends, is one of the most famous songs with Ringo Starr on vocals. Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds, great stuff there, great harmonizing by Paul and John. Let's see, Getting Better, Fixing a Hole, She's Leaving Home, Being for the Benefit of Mr. Kite, the really cool psychedelic and Indian rock infused Within You Without You by George Harrison, probably the most unique song on this album. Also, you have Lovely Rita, When I'm 64, and Good Morning, and A Day in the Life, which A Day in the Life is one of my favorite songs of all time, one of the best album closers ever written, and it's an absolute masterpiece by John Lennon. Really, this whole album is an absolute masterpiece by the Fab Four, my favorite Beatles album of all time, and like I said, my 1 and 2 are really, really close here, so one of my favorite albums of all time, my number 2 here on the list. That's how I'm feeling today, so gotta go with Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band by the Beatles, one of my favorite albums ever written. Before we get to my number 1, I do have a handful of honorable mentions here that I do want to give some special recognition to. So, honorable mentions go out to Deep Purple in Rock. Also, Jar of Flies by Alice in Chains. Gotta go with Load by Metallica. Abbey Road by the Beatles, and Heaven and Hell by Black Sabbath. All incredible albums, but I can only fit 15 on the list. I already stretched it from a top 10 to a top 15, and to be more concise, I didn't want to go to a top 20, but those are some other albums that I really enjoy, some of my other favorites that did not make the list, so did want to give some honorable mentions to those albums. Great albums, but I can only fit 15 on the list. Also, I'm not counting live albums here on this list, but if I were, my favorite live album of all time is Alice in Chains' MTV Unplugged, just one of the best MTV Unplugs of all time. The aura surrounding Lane Staley here is just awesome. The band is firing on all cylinders as well. I love the track listing and the way that a number of songs come off in the acoustic setting. Just really, really great stuff here. And like I said, it's my favorite live album of all time. We're not counting live albums here on this list, but if I were, this is my favorite live album of all time. And finally, coming in at number 1, my all-time favorite rock and metal album is The Crimson Idol by W.A.S.P. And, if you've been a follower of the channel for a little bit, you probably know this is my favorite album of all time. I think it's an absolute masterpiece, written by Blackie Lawless here. The concept is amazing, just a really cool concept, and it's really interesting to hear it play out. Thought all the tracks on here, some of my favorite tracks on here, really the whole thing, from top to bottom. This album is loaded with incredible material, like The Invisible Boy, Arena of Pleasure, Chainsaw Charlie, The Gypsy Meets the Boy, Dr. Rockter, I Am One, The Idol, Hold On to My Heart, and then The Great Misconceptions of Me, a 10-minute epic to close things out. like I said, the concept here is amazing, and this is Blackie Lawless's best work in my opinion, and it's really cool to hear some of his outside influences coming through here on this album, you know, really taking from bands like The Who and Led Zeppelin on here, which is really, really interesting to hear. And like I said, I think Blackie Lawless does an incredible job on here. It's my favorite album of all time, and I said it before and I'll say it again, I love a good concept album, and this is one of the best in my opinion. So coming in at number 1, my favorite album ever written has got to be The Crimson Idol by W.A.S.P. So that wraps up my list of top 15 favorite rock and metal albums of all time, which should be visible right over here. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel down below, turn on the bell for notifications to be notified of a new upload, and let me know in the comments below what are some of your favorite albums of all time in rock and metal. Let me know all that good stuff down in the comments. I'd love to hear your guys' favorites, and till next time, it's the CD guy, Johnny Z, signing off. Take care, everybody.